Hey folks, summer is here, June the 10th. Who'd have thunk it? Already nearly halfway through 2019. I'm going to start the podcast today just by thanking those of you who have taken time to support the podcast on Patreon. As those regular listeners will know, I've been asking people to sign up at www.patreon.com/Seaniebee. And the response has been fantastic, to the point where right now the contributions I'm getting to the podcast are covering the cost of making the podcast. And that has been an enormous help to me. So thank you all very much. Those of you who haven't yet signed up, if you could, that'd be great. Of course, it's always going to be free to those listening. That's the way I envisage it. Some of you may have seen some irritating ads for A Pint with Seaniebee on Facebook. I would like to thank my friend Ben Griffiths, who organised that. I have also spoken in the past about one of the roles I see for this podcast as for kids and teenagers who haven't yet decided what they want to be when they grow up or what they want to do with their lives. And this podcast series I also see as a resource for them and career guidance teachers to allow kids to listen to my guests and the lives they have lived and the decisions they've made and the choices and troubles they've had to overcome. And as I said, career guidance teachers are also on the radar in that regard. So if you know anyone who is a teacher, mention the podcast to them as well, or send it to them. There's a couple of schools currently using the podcast in sort of fifth form, sixth form areas, sending it to their kids and asking the kids to have a listen to one of their choice. And apparently it's working quite well. So I'm looking at kind of growing the audience a little bit in that area. Right, on to today's show. Today's show is there's a funny backstory to it. With podcasting, I tend to try and find somewhere relatively quiet to record. As you can imagine, I've had gigantic errors in the past where I've tried to record in noisy bars, or one particular incident outside a bar in Manly in Sydney over a busy summer's day, and the noise can become unbearable and extremely difficult to edit and reduce and remove, such that you might be able to hear the conversation that's going on. I was interviewing the guest for this show in a hotel in London, and I was there an hour before our intended meeting time, and I sleuthed around for the best place possible. The hotel was quite quiet, and I was meeting David Hepworth, who is my guest, in what I thought was a quiet lobby. As soon as we pressed play, all the various conference rooms that were having conferences in this hotel opened up, and everyone left and walked by us chatting, and staff members of the hotel started trundling by with tables on huge plinths, and it became an absolute nightmare. And the nightmare was made slightly worse by the fact that my guest is himself a broadcaster. So he was kind of looking at me as if I had two heads, wondering what sort of an Irish idiot would pick such a clearly atrocious place from which we would try and record our podcast. Anyway, he was a great sport about it and gave me a great interview, punctuated by pauses and noisy stoppages. But his story is a great one. It's very well worth telling. We're coming up, would you believe, to 34 years since LiveAid. I think it was the 13th of July 1985. And it still ranks as one of the most phenomenal achievements to even put it on, not to mind broadcast it around the world. David Hepworth, my guest today, is a writer and a man who has spent most of his life in the music business. He was actually a presenter on BBC that day and talks about what it was like to be on the front of camera introducing all these acts. As this amazing day kind of unfurled, you'll hear him talk about the fact that when he went home at night, he had no idea of the impact this show was having as he was broadcasting it during the day. He's a great raconteur. He's just released a new book all about the history of the long playing record, which will be very interesting for you to hear. And he was a founder, contributor and editor of things like Smash Hits magazine. He's a music journalist. He also hosted the Old Grey Whistle Test, which for those of you of a certain generation will remember fondly as kind of a cool version of Top of the Pops. Anyway, I learned my lesson. I thank David Hepworth very much for his patience. There's an awful lot of editing went into getting this thing to a point where it can be listened to without aggravation. without further ado, I give you
He has written a
David
lot of books
Hepworth.
about rock music and rock stars, and his new book is A Fabulous Creation, which is just launched, and in fact he's on a promotional tour. I'd like to think a Pint with Seaniebee is part of that. I'm welcoming to the podcast David Hepworth. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you very much for agreeing to see me. Tell me about your new book.
It's called the Era of the LP is really what it's about. So it's kind of 1967 to 1982. It starts with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and it finishes with Thriller. And I suppose what I wanted to do, when it comes to music history, I suppose I'm as interested in the history as I am in the music. And the bit of the history that interests me is how people interact with this stuff. And I think there's a danger with LPs that they get kind of confused with the revival in interest in all things vinyl.
Yes.
So I get young people come to my house and say, "Oh, look, you've got a lot of vinyls."
Yeah.
Whatever is that all about? And what I wanted to do is to kind of summon up the age when the long-playing record was the primary medium of home entertainment, really.
Yeah.
And also to kind of look at why you'll never bring it back.
Yeah. So
But
even with the relaunch of vinyl you still, that's a different thing.
I think it's a different thing, because I think one of the points I'm making in the book, is that if you look at the glory days of the LPs, you had in Britain 2 channels of television.
Yeah. Millions watching Top of the Pops.
Absolutely.
David was a host of the old Grey Whistle Test, which was the cool Top of the Pops.
And and there was no time shifting, there was no VHS, and there was clearly no mobile phone, no social media. You had very few leisure options. A record in those days, and musical experience was you focused on a record in a way that I don't think it's possible to do any longer. And I think there's loads of reasons. The reason it's called A Fabulous Creation is that the 12-inch record, the 12-inch LP, was a kind of wonderful, magical product of its limitations.
Yeah.
It was easy to damage, difficult to carry around.
Yeah.
So all those things made it really precious.
And it wasn't one song; it was a bunch of songs deliberately placed in order of,
it was kind of an experience. But apart from anything else, it was difficult to kind of skip tracks.
Yeah, exactly.
You had to know what you were doing to do that. You'd probably scratch it in the process.
Yeah.
Whereas everything we do nowadays, whether it's reading or watching Netflix or using a mobile phone, we do, it strikes me, with our finger on the button, ready to take us away.
Move on.
And so moving on is the key part of the experience.
Yeah.
Whereas nothing could be further from the LP.
What do you think the greatest LP ever made was? Pepper?
Oh,
in your own opinion.
When I look, for the purpose of that book, when I looked at the golden age and the mature masterpieces, it strikes me of 1974, are things like Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark and things like Randy Newman's Good Old Boys. Because in the case of Court and Spark, I think because it's kind of got the sophistication of a novel, but it's also got the simple playability of a pop record, which it had to have. And in the case of Randy Newman's Good Old Boys, because I adore Randy Newman, nobody would ever dare make that record any longer. You simply would not be allowed to make that record.
Your favourite single, and you're very vociferous about this, is Chuck Berry's You Never Can Tell.
Chuck Berry's You Never Can Tell.
Why is that the greatest single? You're very adamant about this.
Well, listen, it's partly tongue-in-cheek,
Yeah.
and it's a residue of, we used to work on Smash Hits years ago, and one of the kind of common amusements used to be, I think you'll find the greatest record ever made is whatever it was. Yeah. And then somebody goes, no, if you go and check your working out, I think you'll find it was just a joke. But I think, why do I pick You Never Can Tell? Because it's the most beautiful, hopeful, upfall thing.
It is lovely,
but it's made by the most misanthropic old shit. That's the interesting thing to me. And people always want to adore rock stars.
Maybe it's kind of what the life he would have liked to have lived. Maybe he was guy.
He was really good at thinking his way into that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's also fabulously sophisticated, and his lyrics are just masterful.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I had on my podcast 2 or 3 episodes ago Brian Griffin, who you may know. He was one of the top photographers who photographed most of those albums from the 70s and 80s, and very interesting take on him to it as well. You said the album finished with Thriller. We're recording this podcast a couple of weeks after the big Michael Jackson documentary on Channel 4, which plays well to your book. Why was Thriller the end? Because there was lots of LPs after that.
There's lots of LPs after that. Well, I suppose because loads of things came along to supplant the ancient purpose of the LP. The Walkman arrived.
Yeah.
The Walkman changed everything. The Walkman allowed you to kind of design, to make music a soundtrack to your daily movement around the world. It also tempted you to kind of make your own compilations and not accept the kind of off-the-shelf thing. And the video arrived, and the video changed it. So you're no longer sitting there looking at a record, generating your own pictures in your head. If you look at some of Michael Jackson, he was an audio-visual entertainer.
Well, Billie Jean, Thriller.
Well, they made MTV, and MTV made him. And also, I think there was something about the sheer scale of his success that was the kind of end. Because it strikes me it was kind of reverse engineered, if that's the appropriate expression. We'll start with the market first. What does the market want?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll put together something that the market wants. And behold, the market did want it. And ever since that point, everybody, rolling the dice has been trying to do it in a very similar way. Whereas I don't think when the Beatles made Sgt. Pepper, I don't think that was their thought at all.
No.
Their thought was to impress their peers. I don't think it bothered them whether it sold, 40 million or 20 million or whatever. And then you've got the CD, and the CD's a different thing. The CD.
Brothers in Arms was the one that kind of, I remember.
That was the thing that was used as kind of, to demonstrate the CD player. So you went in any department store, whenever that was.
Yeah.
You'd always hear.
Did you hear the story about Blame It on the Boogie? Do you know the story about that?
No,
right. So Blame It on the Boogie was written by Michael Jackson. Right. And I think it came out in 1975 or 6, which would have meant Michael Jackson was something like whenever Michael Jackson was 14. Okay? And then in 2 years previously, there was a song called Blame It on the Boogie, which is exactly the same song. And on that album, the Jackson 5, it was all songs written by the Jackson 5 or whatever, or by the Jacksons. But there was a different Michael Jackson from Bolton who actually wrote Blame It on the Boogie. And so on the album, Michael Jackson, but it wasn't the Jackson 5 Michael Jackson, was listed as the writer. So they did say, all songs by Jackson.
I didn't know that.
And there is a guy who's been dining out, well, not dining out, I'm sure, but gritting his teeth about the fact that he wrote Blame It on the Boogie. Because there's no way a 14-year-old could write, it was a beautiful pop song.
Right.
And they just went, right, written by Michael Jackson.
Yeah, absolutely.
Didn't tell any lies.
I was thinking when I was writing this book, Thriller, they started off with hundreds of songs for Thriller.
Right.
And all the big songwriters in Hollywood and the States all punted songs. Can you get a song with a Michael Jackson album?
Yeah.
And there was one guy that had a song on the running order, and then when they redid the running order, he was bounced.
Really?
Can you imagine that?
Is Michael Jackson dead now, finally?
As a phenomenon?
Yeah. Has this new documentary killed him, finally?
Well, all I'd say to that is I wouldn't like to have shares in his legacy right now.
Or the West End show around the corner.
I think certainly the persona Michael Jackson is very difficult to imagine that selling. I wrote a column in the Radio Times very recently about that I could understand why Radio 2 weren't playing any Michael Jackson records, but you couldn't ban him. You couldn't treat him like he was a Gary Glitter. With Michael Jackson, there are three pillars of popular music: Michael Jackson, the Beatles, and Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
Without whom you do not understand it.
Yeah.
And so you can't take him away like that. I think the present has to find a way of dealing with the past without feeling it has to mark the past out of 10, which is it's what I call the tyranny of now. I come across a lot of signs of this.
The parallel thing that you write about as well, and have written books about, I think your book on Common People, is the rise and fall of rock stars.
Yeah.
Your theory is that there will never be a rock star like Elvis again.
No, they can't be. They can't be because, apart from anything else, social media. If a rock star went round behaving today the way that Jimmy Page or David Bowie behaved in 1971, 72, they would be dragged in front of the court of public opinion
Yeah,
forced to apologise.
Outrage, yeah.
They would be forced to apologise for the very things that we used to like about them.
Yeah.
We liked the idea that they got up to things. If you look at the biggest ones nowadays, people like Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran, they're very controlled individuals.
Yeah, they're marketing.
I saw there was a story in the papers over here about Ed Sheeran, wherever Ed Sheeran lives, that the local council were going to go and inspect to make sure he was not up to no good. You thought, that's safe. Ed Sheeran, I'm sure if you live next door to Ed Sheeran, I'm sure he's the most considerate neighbour you could possibly have. You know,
how do you, like, as a guy who's lived the rock star era, how do you view this outrage culture that we have now? You know, where anything that's said. I mean, I went to see Doug Stanhope in concert, the American comedian. He arrived out on stage, put his glasses on, took a piece of paper out, and apologised as his opening piece for what he might be about to say and who he might, offend.
I think it's sad, really. I think we have to find a way of dealing with it. You know, one of the things I talked about is the dawn of the comedy record. And I was writing about an American female comedian called Rusty, I can't remember her second name, who was a very big deal in the 60s, kind of nudge, saucy comedy, and making her own albums. Of course, she never got on the radio because she was doing stuff about sex. And if you listen to it now, it's the tamest thing you've ever heard. But what was outrageous at the time was it was a woman comedian talking about sex. Nowadays, the only comedians who talk about sex are women. Men literally wouldn't dare go.
I mean, in Dublin in the 70s, when I was growing up, Monty Python's Life of Brian soundtrack, and we used to crowd around. The movie was banned in Ireland until 1994. Go figure. Right. There was an outrage Christian, culture in Ireland. You can't do it. Tell me a bit about your background. I'd like to just find out where people were from and how you got into where you got to.
Oh, my background, I come from Yorkshire.
You don't have a Yorkshire accent.
No, I've lived in London since 1968, so I consider myself Londoner probably. And I came down to London in 68 I kind of wanted to be an actor. I laughed myself at the idea of it. And my parents, like everybody's parents in those days, said, don't do that. Go and be a teacher. So that's what they did. You know, I did 3 or 4 years at college, university and so forth, and did a year's teaching. And this is the early 70s. I thought, no, that's not really what I want to do. I ended up with a job at HMV, the big HMV shop on Oxford Street, because I'd always been obsessed with records, and all I wanted to do was get near records. And so I had a job there for about a year, for about 3 years, which really should have been a year. But I was in the comfort zone. And that led to a job working for a small independent record company around about 76, 77. By then I started writing for the music papers, NME and Sounds, places like that.
I interviewed Paolo Hewitt recently.
Oh, right. Right. And I found myself without no visible means of support. And I rang up Fred Deller, a guy I'd known at the NME. I said, is there any work around? He said, well, call Nick Logan, because Nick had been the editor of the NME. He's just started this magazine called Smash Hits, and I think he'd like some help. Yeah. So I rang Nick, and Nick said, pretty much, can you come in tomorrow? Yeah. And I went in the following day and never left.
And Smash Hits I was the target audience.
Well, there you go. And it was huge, So I joined there 79, I suppose, and became features editor and then editor, and then it was one of those magazines, this was the glory days of magazine publishing, whenever more copies you put out, more you sold. And so the company who owned the EMAP, they saw it as an opportunity to grow. And so I was given the job as editorial director of kind of launching other magazines.
Which you did.
And so we launched Just 17,
Empire,
and Q and Empire and Mojo and loads.
Did you like that part of your career?
Loved
or did you prefer the broadcast element?
No, I love the magazine part of my career, but it's gone away now. I think that we probably thought it would go on forever. And
they still say if you make a good magazine, I mean, there was a doom loop of like no advertising, no journalism, shit product, down the gurgle. I worked with Bloomberg Business Week's relaunch in America, which they were doing it for completely different reasons, for getting journalist profile. You can't apparently win a Pulitzer unless you have a printed thing.
No, I'm sure.
Steve Jobs wanting to send his mammy home a picture of him on the front cover.
That's true.
What about the old grey whistle test, all that side of it?
Alongside the journalism, I used to do bits for radio. I used to do Saturday afternoon. Radio 1 used to be a program called Rock On. And through that, actually, I tell you, in 1980, I went to New York for the first time and I went to see Bruce Springsteen, Madison Square Garden, on Thanksgiving. And there was a party afterwards in the bowling alley in Madison Square Garden. And I'd had a couple of beers. And Mike Appleton, who was the kind of producer, editor of Whistle Test, who I kind of knew, he was there. And for the only time in my life, I went up to somebody and said, do you know what you need? You need me. Which is really kind of not me at all to do that. And
were you drunk?
Yeah. Not stocious, but you know.
You had your spoons.
Yeah. And a few weeks later, he rang me up and said, can you come in? And that was just after John Lennon had died. And so I started doing, odd bits that was the test with Annie Nightingale, who was the main presenter. And there's me and Mark Allen and there's Andy Kershaw, and then there's LiveAid and Band-Aid. And
so we have to touch on the LiveAid being an Irishman. This was your claim. So basically, David was one of the hosts of the broadcast, right, on BBC.
Yes, one of them. Yeah.
And this was in 1985, wasn't it? And
yes.
Geldof, who was one of the organisers with Midge Ure. In fact, David's latest podcast, I think, has got an interview with Midge Ure. Right?
Yes.
And Geldof came on, and it was all live, and he used the F word many times, which
not
was
that
never...
many, not many times.
No.
Not many times. It's
Give us all your fucking money.
No, he didn't say that. The thing when I was on was that, do you want the boring truth?
No, I want the full truth, yeah.
This was
Billy Connolly was on the seat as well.
Billy Connolly, I've got a good story about Billy Connolly.
Yeah.
And the BBC were most keen that this not be seen as a telethon, because they didn't want every charity in Britain beating it past their door saying, us next week.
Our numbers are down.
When they appealed for money, they did it in a certain order, which was postal address first, then I can't remember what post office details, and then the third one was a phone number. And you had to do it in a certain order because that's when the captions came up. And so I had Bob on in that part, and he was very exercised about the fact that he needed to be raising more money. I said, let's just remind other people of how they can contribute. And first the address, because I knew that's how it came up. And he said, fuck the address. And I just remember thinking, oh, God, I do hope my mother's not watching. Because my mother was watching.
Everyone was watching.
The world was watching. Because you didn't realise that until you got home. You were just in the bubble of Wembley, and it was a very hot day, and it was chaos. And, it wasn't until I got home after the after party and all that, 4 a.m. And my wife's just sitting up in bed going, well, that was something, wasn't it? And I thought, oh, was it? And she said, yeah, during the day she had everybody ringing up.
Really?
Like family, like they had parents, because it just gathered momentum during the day, which you weren't aware of. I mean, I've even got, my daughter has sent me yesterday a screen grab of, in the Freddie Mercury film.
Yeah. So
an actor appears as me, apparently.
Really? Which
yeah.
one?
Well, I don't know if I can find the picture. She... That something he doesn't. I don't think he speaks.
It took me 3 visits to watch that movie.
I haven't seen it.
I thought it was. It's like a hagiography.
I don't know. There it is. That's an actor looking like Bob Geldof and an actor looking like me. And people say, "Have you seen it?" I said, "No, I haven't seen it." I'm not in a hurry to see it. I've never watched the thing at all.
There's a piece of it on YouTube which I saw. It is on YouTube with Billy Connolly giggling away.
Billy Connolly is a funniest.
What's your Billy Connolly?
Funniest. My funniest memory of the day was I was in there on the box when the Pretenders were on, and this was not long after James Honeyman Scott and Pete Farndon, the bassist and the guitarist, had both died, drug-related deaths. And Billy Connolly turned to me as they were playing. I won't attempt to do his accent. He said, I wouldn't join that group. I said, why not? He said, nobody leaves. It's my favourite memory of life.
He was a legend. So you have this, the death of rock stars, the death of LPs.
Oh, right, I do. I'm the Undertaker to the
industry. What's away from music? What's your view in life? Where are we going? Hell in a handcart?
Hell in a handcart. It certainly feels like that.
Do you feel positive or negative or optimistic or pessimistic?
I feel very pessimistic about the kind of mad polarisation that's taken place in this country. That I'm sure you find very similar parallels to it in the United States, and I don't know, in Ireland, I don't know, maybe you can.
But in Ireland, we're looking at Britain going, what the fuck is going on? Because we were under your yoke for so many years, and your politicians were always kind of scary in a Norman Tebbit or Thatcher kind of way, and now they're sort of idiots, like almost, with all due respect. But
they're having to, ask a silly question, you get a silly answer.
What do you think is going to happen? The numbers suggest a new vote should be on the cards, bearing in mind 37% of people 2 years ago, minus 2 million voted out. There's no guarantee, by the way, if there was another vote, that there wouldn't still be the same outcome.
Absolutely, you just don't know.
You have
my view about the Europe. I'm coloured by the fact that the British government spent most of my youth trying to get in.
Yeah, I know.
I remember this.
It was very good for us.
I voted in 1975 to stay in it, whatever you did it. But on the other hand, I don't believe it's a great magic solution to all the problems of the world.
I agree with you.
I don't think it's going to be there forever.
It's flabby.
And I think what you've got at the moment, what I hear at the moment, is a dialogue of the deaf between people who believe that leaving will suddenly result in far more jobs for their plumbers, or God knows what they think, and a load of money going to the health service. And on the other hand, you've got a load of kind of the people on the other side who believe that no, we're all going to join hands and dance around kind of European flag, drinking cappuccino. The world doesn't work like that,
And what about the rest? Are we going to be run by robot overlords? And like, for the first time in my life, I'm not that bothered that I'm not going to see what the future holds. You know what I mean? I was always ready to go, it'd be great to see where this goes, that goes. It is the best time to be alive.
I tell you what, I think people keep saying, they should bring back tomorrow's world. I'd say no, they should have a program called Yesterday's World, because we don't believe in tomorrow's world anymore. Because if you were to tell me that a piece of technology will be able to do this in the future, I will tend to think, well, why can't it do it now? Because things have happened so fast. What's interesting to me, and it's partly what I write these books about, is I'm writing about the day before yesterday, which we've probably forgotten about.
Yes.
Do
you think there were good old days?
Well, was it Loudon Wainwright saying the good old days are good and gone now? That's why they're good, because they're gone.
Yeah. Nice. When was America great?
That's a nonsense idea. I don't believe that music was any better then than it's better now. But I do think it's different, and I think the way we consume things, the way we interact with things, is very different. We are very impatient nowadays. We're made impatient.
I read your piece, which is nice, about the oeuvre of classical music, and then that goes away, and then there was the sort of jazz,
it's
and
40
then
years
rock music, and now there's.
So you're at the end of hip hop. You're at the end of the hip hop.
Yeah, and then something else. There
will be something else. There will be something else, but
there's only so many notes we can play instead.
Well, except you would probably have said that before hip hop. Hip hop is very innovative, but not in a kind of tune sense, not in the kind of written music sense. It's a different kind of tradition.
I mean, Simon Cowell, doesn't Simon Cowell have a lot to answer for?
I think television's got a lot to answer for.
I'm going to be famous. I'm going to be without doing the Hamburg, without doing the 10,000 hours that makes you a fucking good at what you do.
Well, maybe they're kind of good at different things, aren't they? Suppose if your view of stardom is being on telly is a good proving ground for that. I don't think it was for the Beatles. It was a different world then, and the people who come up nowadays are very sophisticated. They're very self-possessed. I think it's difficult for them to be as impactful.
A Fabulous Creation is the name of the book. It's available in a link at the bottom of the podcast. Keep writing and keep biographing what now looks like the fall of music. And good luck with your life. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.